Imagine walking into your home late at night, your badge still pinned to your chest, your heart heavy from another long shift keeping strangers safe, only to find the one person you trusted most destroying everything you thought was sacred. A sound you can't explain. A door slightly open. A whisper that freezes your blood. You take one step closer and what you see next will change the meaning of justice forever. This isn't a case of rage or mistake, it's a moment where law, love, and horror collided inside one Texas home. Stay with me because once you hear what happened that night, you'll question what any of us are truly capable of when the line between duty and blood is crossed. If you crave real true crime stories that reveal the human mind at its darkest edge, subscribe, stay close, and don't look away because this story will haunt you long after it ends. In a quiet Texas town where folks left their doors unlocked and Sunday service was the heart of every week, the Grangers were seen as the picture of goodness. Melissa Granger wore her deputy badge with pride. She was calm, firm, and trusted by everyone who knew her. The kind of sheriff who showed up first and left last. Her husband, Daniel, taught history at the local high school. Students liked him, parents trusted him, and teachers called him a man of strong morals. Together they seemed unshakable, two people holding up the very idea of family and order. Their only child, Sophie, was the quiet type. Always drawing, always in her own world. She'd paint pictures of sunsets and horses, the kind of art that made her mother smile and her father beam with pride. Neighbors said they could hear her laughter through the window some evenings when the family gathered for dinner. To anyone looking in, life seemed peaceful, almost perfect. But perfection has a strange way of hiding rot. Behind the laughter and warm porch lights, the Granger home carried something heavy. Something that made Sophie's light fade a little more each day. Her smile changed. Her drawings turned darker. Melissa noticed, but told herself it was just teenage mood. Everyone did. Until one night, when everything she ignored would come back for her. One night that would turn the quiet town of Willow Creek into the scene of a nightmare, and force its own sheriff to answer the question: how far can love go before it becomes revenge? Melissa Granger was not the kind of woman people forgot. 12 years in uniform had shaped her into someone steady and brave, the kind of officer who could calm a crying child one moment and face down danger the next. She had seen things most people only read about in reports: broken homes, broken bodies, and women who stayed silent for too long. That was why she joined the force in the first place, to be the one who stood up when no one else could. Her faith guided her, her badge defined her, and her daughter gave her purpose. To the people of Willow Creek, she was more than a sheriff, she was safety itself. Daniel Granger was her opposite in every gentle way. Soft-spoken, charming, always ready with a smile. At the local high school, students adored him. He coached debate, stayed late to help with history projects, and parents trusted him without question. But under that easy charm, there were whispers. A parent once complained about how close he stood beside a student, another noticed his texts came too often. It was all brushed off. After all, Daniel was the sheriff's husband. What reason was there to doubt him? Sophie, their daughter, carried her mother's eyes but her father's quiet nature. Her notebooks were filled with sketches, fields, birds, things that felt free. Lately though, her art had changed. The colors turned heavy, her drawings darker. Her laughter came less often, replaced by silence that settled around her like fog. Teachers noticed the slip in her grades. Friends said she stopped showing up to hangouts. When Melissa was asked about it, she only smiled tiredly and said, "Teenage years, you know how it is." Willow Creek wasn't the kind of town that looked for trouble. Fewer than 5,000 people lived there, most of them born and raised under the same wide Texas sky. They trusted the sheriff's family without question. Melissa's word was law, Daniel's smile was warmth, and Sophie's quiet nature was simply shyness. No one saw what was happening behind their closed doors. No one imagined that inside that tidy blue house at the edge of town, a secret was growing so ugly it would tear apart the very idea of family. And when it finally came out, it wouldn't just destroy trust, it would make the whole town ask itself a question no one ever wants to face: when the protector becomes the executioner, who decides what justice really means? It was a warm July night, quiet like most nights in Willow Creek. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of streetlights and the slow turning of ceiling fans behind closed windows. Sheriff Melissa Granger was supposed to be on patrol, but her radio started acting up. Static, cutting in and out. She sighed, turned the car around, and drove home to reset the signal. It was a small decision, the kind you don't think twice about. But it would lead her straight into the kind of truth no one survives unchanged. When she stepped through the front door, everything felt wrong. The house was too still. No television, no ticking clock. Just a faint sound, soft, uneven, coming from upstairs. Her boots made no noise on the carpet as she walked toward the sound. At first, she thought maybe Sophie had a nightmare. Maybe Daniel was comforting her. That thought made her smile for a second. But the sound changed, became something else entirely. A sound she couldn't place, didn't want to. She climbed the last few steps, her breath growing heavy. The bedroom door was half open, light spilling through a thin crack. And in that moment, standing at the threshold, her world ended. What she saw made her hand tremble so violently she nearly dropped her gun. The man she trusted, the man who wore a wedding ring that matched hers, was with their daughter. The look in Sophie's eyes was enough to crush the air from her lungs. The scream that tore out of Melissa wasn't that of an officer, it was that of a mother. She didn't fire her weapon, she couldn't. Instead, she lunged at Daniel, shoving him off the bed as Sophie bolted past her, crying, shaking, running barefoot out the door. Neighbors would later say they heard a woman shouting, "How could you?" before everything went to chaos. Melissa wrestled him to the floor, her mind blank and wild. She handcuffed him with the same cuffs she used to take criminals off the street, but this wasn't duty anymore, it was something deeper, darker, something primal. In her fury, she reached for the knife on her belt, the same one she carried for protection. And in a single, blinding moment of rage and despair, she did the unthinkable. When the first officers arrived minutes later, they found Daniel barely conscious, bleeding and gasping, while Melissa sat on the floor beside him, silent, her face streaked with tears. Her radio was still on, crackling with the sound of dispatch trying to reach her. Outside, Sophie stood on the neighbor's porch, shaking under a blanket, her voice barely a whisper when she said, "He's been doing it for months." By sunrise, the sheriff's home was surrounded by flashing lights, and the town that trusted her woke to a horror none of them could understand. How does a woman sworn to uphold the law become the one who breaks it so completely? And when justice and revenge look the same, does it still count as a crime? When the first responders arrived at the Granger home, they hesitated before even stepping inside. It was one of their own. The sheriff. Her cruiser still parked in the driveway, lights flashing weakly against the siding. Inside, Melissa sat on the floor in her uniform, her hands trembling, her face empty. She didn't fight, didn't speak much, just stared at the blood on her hands and whispered the same 4 words over and over again: "He hurt my baby." Her colleagues had seen murder scenes before, but nothing like this. Nothing so personal, so impossible to process. Daniel was rushed to the hospital under guard, barely alive. Melissa was escorted out quietly, wrapped in a blanket, her badge taken from her chest. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't cry. She just kept asking if Sophie was safe. Within hours, detectives from outside the county were called in. The case couldn't be handled locally, it was too close, too tangled. Sophie was taken to a nearby medical center, where doctors confirmed what Melissa had already known deep down. There were signs of long-term abuse, months of grooming, fear, and silence. The kind of truth that leaves a scar deeper than any wound. Investigators searched the Granger home and found what no one in that town wanted to believe. A hidden camera placed behind a bookshelf in Sophie's room. Files on Daniel's laptop, one folder named Memories. Inside were videos, messages, and images that told a story far darker than anyone imagined. Sophie's diary, hidden under her mattress, filled in the rest. She had tried to tell her father to stop. She had written that she wanted to run away. But he always convinced her not to. Always promised he loved her more than anyone else ever could. As the truth spread, the small town of Willow Creek cracked in half. Some saw Melissa as a mother who did what any parent would do in that moment. Others said she was a law officer who lost control, who crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Churches prayed for her. Talk shows called her both a monster and a hero. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, their headlines bold and cruel: Texas sheriff mutilates husband after catching him assaulting daughter. Through it all, Melissa stayed silent. No interviews, no statements. When questioned by detectives, she spoke only once, saying, "You don't get to call it justice until you've seen what he did." Forensic evidence matched her account. The timeline, the injuries, the scene, it all confirmed what she had walked in on that night. Even her own deputies struggled with what to feel. One of them, her partner for 6 years, told investigators, she wasn't acting as a sheriff that night. She was acting as a mother. But in a justice system built on rules, emotion doesn't matter. Evidence speaks louder than pain. And the question no one wanted to answer began to rise: could love for a child ever excuse the kind of revenge that stains your hands forever? Melissa sat in court wearing the same calm expression she had the night of the arrest, too calm, some said, like a woman whose soul had already burned out. The district attorney called it rage masked as reason, but the jury couldn't take their eyes off her trembling hands. Every question thrown at her felt like another wound reopened. When asked if she regretted what she did, she whispered, "I regret not seeing it sooner." The prosecution painted a picture of vengeance, saying Melissa planned it, that she knew exactly what she was doing when she reached for that knife. But every mother watching from home saw something else: a woman who'd finally snapped after living with a monster she didn't know was sleeping beside her. Sophie's testimony never reached the public, but whispers leaked out. They said the girl described being groomed, manipulated, silenced with fear. She said her father had told her no one would believe her because her mother's a cop. When she said those words, people in the courtroom shifted, some turning away, others fighting back tears. And when she finally broke down crying saying, "Mom saved me," even the judge paused, trying to compose himself. The headlines went wild. Some called her a hero, others said she was proof that justice could turn savage. Talk shows debated her sanity, podcasts tore her story apart. Psychologists lined up on both sides, some saying she acted under extreme trauma, others calling it deliberate, and execution masked as protection. And through it all, Melissa refused interviews. No statements, no appearances. Just silence. Her lawyer called it dignity. The state called it guilt. When the verdict approached, the courthouse was surrounded, mothers holding signs that read she protected her child, protesters chanting no one is above the law. Inside, Sophie sat alone in the front row, clutching a small stuffed bear. She wouldn't look at the jury. Then the foreman stood. The room froze. The words that came next changed everything. But here's what no one in that courtroom knew: a sealed piece of evidence, one that could rewrite everything, was still sitting in the evidence locker, untouched, unreviewed, and quietly forgotten. What was inside that envelope, and why had no one dared to open it? When the jury finally returned, the silence in that courtroom felt heavier than any sentence. Melissa didn't blink as the foreman stood, her face pale but steady. The verdict: guilty of voluntary manslaughter, level injury, hit like a muted gunshot. No cheers, no cries, just the soft shuffle of reporters scribbling as the judge's gavel came down. But then came the twist: the jury recommended leniency. 5 years probation, mandatory therapy. No prison. Some gasped. Others clapped before being silenced by the bailiff. The judge looked torn, his voice shaking slightly as he read her sentence aloud. Melissa's eyes stayed fixed on the floor, as though she couldn't believe mercy had found her. Daniel, still recovering, sat slumped behind his attorney, his face a warped shadow of what it once was. When news broke that he'd been charged and convicted for child sexual assault, sentenced to 40 years behind bars, the entire nation erupted. For some, it was justice served twice over. For others, it felt like two tragedies feeding off each other. TV anchors called it the verdict of the decade. Polls showed 7 out of 10 Americans sided with Melissa, calling her brave, broken, and blameless. Online forums crowned her the mother sheriff who stood up. But there were those who whispered darker things, that the law had been bent by emotion, that justice was slowly losing its shape under the weight of empathy. Melissa disappeared from the public eye after sentencing. No interviews. No book deals. Just silence. Sophie began therapy in another state, under a new name. The house where it all happened was sold, but no one stayed in it for long. Months later, an anonymous package arrived at the county prosecutor's office. No return address, no note. Inside was a single USB drive labeled Memories. The same name as the secret folder found on Daniel's laptop. But when they plugged it in, the contents weren't what anyone expected. It wasn't Daniel's doing this time. It was something else. Something recorded long before that night. And once they saw what was on it, everything they thought they knew about the hero mother started to unravel. So what exactly was on that drive, and why had Melissa kept it hidden all along? The footage from the USB spread through the investigation unit like wildfire. There was no sound at first, just a flicker of an old home video. Melissa, years younger, laughing, holding baby Sophie in her arms. Daniel behind the camera, his voice calm, soft, ordinary. But as the clips continued, the warmth drained. In one frame, Melissa stared at the lens, her smile gone, whispering something that wasn't clear. She looked terrified. It was never submitted as evidence, never mentioned in court. No one knew why. Some said it showed she had known something was wrong long before that night. Others believed it proved the years of control Daniel held over them both. The truth blurred, tangled in pain and memory. The case had ended, but its questions lingered like smoke after a house fire. The law had done its part, or tried to. Yet the real question still clawed at people's minds: how far can someone go before justice turns into vengeance? Reporters moved on to new scandals, new tragedies. But those who'd watched it all unfold couldn't forget. They said Melissa's story wasn't just about a crime, it was about every silence that went unheard, every victim too scared to speak. Experts later said Melissa's mind snapped under the weight of two roles: officer and mother, bound by duty, broken by betrayal. Her act was horrifying, one psychologist said, but to her, it was the only way to stop the horror. Some called her a hero. Others, a criminal. Maybe she was both. But late one evening, months later, an officer who'd worked the case received a letter with no name, no signature. Just a single line written in shaky handwriting. "You still don't know the whole story." So what did Melissa Granger really know that night, and what truth was still buried beneath it all? This was the case of Sheriff Melissa Granger, the mother who carried a badge, the protector who became the headline. Her name still divides dinner tables, still sparks arguments in courtrooms and classrooms alike. Some say she acted out of pure love. Others believe she crossed a line no one should ever cross, no matter the reason. But everyone agrees on one thing: that night, something inside her broke forever. The Granger home was sold months later. No one stays long. They say at night, the lights flicker in the upstairs window, the same room where everything changed. The neighbors don't talk about it anymore, but every year on July 14th, fresh flowers appear on the porch. No one knows who leaves them. Melissa remains under probation, quiet, unseen. Sophie lives with her aunt, trying to rebuild a life stripped bare by silence and secrets. Daniel sits behind bars, his name a curse even among inmates. But the echoes of that night refuse to die. Because this story isn't just about one family, it's about what happens when trust rots in the dark, when the law meets love, and justice bleeds into revenge. So tell me, when you look at what she did, do you see a criminal? Or a mother who did what any parent might do if the law came home too late? Leave your thoughts below. Was it justice, or was it fury disguised as love? And if you think you're ready for another story that will test your idea of right and wrong, stay tuned. Because the next case is darker than anything you've heard so far.